So I've played a lot of PO6, and I mean a lot of it. And over my thousands of hours with the fan game over multiple releases, I thought it was finally time to sit down and talk about it at length. If you're unaware, Sonic Project 06 is a fan-made remake of Sonic 06 with its development led by ChaosX. At this time, its current release is the Silver Patch version 1.4, which contains all 28 stages from each of the main Hedgehog stories with a few extra things thrown in. In this video, we're gonna go through the game by stage rather than by story in the order Sonic travels through them. That way, it's easier to compare and contrast each version of them without all the jumping around. So let's dive in. Our journey begins in Sonic's Wave Ocean. After a short bit of automation, our hero lands on the beach, and immediately we're greeted with the best controlling 3D Sonic ever. It's a joy moving him around in this game. His top speed feels like a solid pace, and the turning is tight at low speeds but gradually loosens the faster he's moving. Jumping has a fantastic speed to it too, with just enough weight to easily adjust and make corrections, but not turn on a dime. Each character in the game controls the exact same way at base too, just with varying degrees of acceleration and top speeds. It's very nice having one consistent control scheme for everyone across the board. The Spin Dash returns, being a mix of the massively overpowered Spam Dash from Sonic Adventure 1 while having the power and somewhat of a delay like Sonic Adventure 2's. Sonic has the ability to spin jump into enemies and bounce off of them, a core mechanic in the series that was absent in the original game. And the homing attack, similar to the Spin Dash, has become spammable once again. The only issue I have with this opening is that not only are you thrusted into water sliding automation as your first experience with the game, but that you can die during it. So the player can lose a life before they even get the chance to properly control Sonic for the first time. My easy solution for this would be to disable jumping for this first water slide, or give us control of Sonic before he runs down the cliff into the scripting. Anyway, defeating the enemies in front of us will more than likely blow up the boxes they're standing on, which reveals an item just floating there. Walking into it causes Sonic to pick up the green gem. One of the most iconic elements of the original game were Sonic's gem abilities, where each one, when equipped, grants him a special action. Rather than stuffing them in a shop, Project 06 hides them in the stages across Sonic's story. The gem is auto-equipped when Sonic picks it up, and a small text box appears that tells us what it does, along with a new piece of the interface showing up in the bottom right, which also does a great job at hinting that there are more gems to find. Moving ahead, Sonic finds himself entering yet another loop into a water section. While I didn't like the first one, I want to talk about a truly genius piece of game design here, the wind boosters. These rings give Sonic a burst of speed while water sliding, and this is told to the player through being forced to enter one in the first section. There is a clear sound, effect, and speed boost when passing through one, and it's a great way of making the water sliding sections interactive as the player will want to enter these after seeing the benefit. It also hints that Sonic can move while water sliding as well, making these wind boosters a textbook example of show and don't tell game design. If the normal path is taken here, Sonic will eventually be launched into a swinging pole, where the player has to press the A button at the right time in order to get a huge boost in the air. This part is platforming design 101, where if the player fails the timing challenge, they're not punished by death, but rather put on an alternate route. There isn't an obvious way to get back up, which encourages replaying the level to see what happens if you succeed. There's some more enemies on this island, so let's re-equip the green gem to access the tornado attack. This attack damages enemies in an area around Sonic, and performing the move causes the glowy bar in the bottom right to deplete a little. This is the action gauge, the meter that serves as Project 06's magic system. When Sonic performs his special actions with the gems, it uses up different amounts of it depending on the skill. The gauge will automatically replenish when Sonic is on the ground, or when he gathers Chaos Drives from defeated enemies. Those are the blue particles that auto-collect after beating one. The Chaos Drives fill up the action gauge regardless of Sonic's predicament, which will become much more useful later on. With the robots gone, we can now see that there are two pathways we can take, and two small islands that have nothing on them. I'm not bitter, you're bitter. This was probably the strongest aspect of the original game that was brought over to PO6, the level design. As we'll get into, the levels of this game are some of, if not the best, 3D Sonic levels. There are so many instances in these stages where taking one path will result in never seeing or interacting with a sizable chunk of the level, which makes replaying and exploring them super fun. Sonic can either take the left path, which requires knowledge of a move we have yet to discuss, or the right path with the spring or light dash that spawns from defeating the robots. The light dash works as usual. Just go up to a trail of rings and press the spin dash, but wait, the light dash has its own unique button mapping? Thank God. The activation range for the dash is very forgiving, incredibly reliable, and gives Sonic full invincibility when gliding along the trail. After the dash, Sonic will land on a rail and start grinding on it. Rail grinding is seen sparsely throughout PO6 except for a couple levels, so we'll talk about it more when it's a main feature. Man, this first stage really throws the kitchen sink at the player and then some. After that, Sonic enters a small chain jump section, a sort of predecessor to the QuickTime event. Just press jump to advance to the next one in the chain. Then, he lands on a rail, which can be jumped off for a rainbow ring shortcut or not to navigate through an area to the left. There's also a small island should the player fail to light dash, which leads to the same place. Regardless of the path taken, Sonic will eventually encounter some gates that he can use the spin dash to pass through, which leads to yet another choice. Do you skip the checkpoint to take the rainbow ring route above, or play it safe and take the lower route? I think now that I've made my point that Wave Ocean's first section does a great job introducing the player, minus the opening to an extent, to all the main mechanics of the game while offering replay value through its multiple routes and shortcuts. So let's speed ahead to the whale chase. Here, Sonic is sent through a series of automated sequences until he grabs onto a whale fin, which is now where another main gameplay feature turns its head, character switching within levels. Control is sent over to Tails for this part, who has to help Sonic by closing the gate so the whale can't escape, even though the whale's headed in the direction Sonic needs to go anyway, but whatever. Tails has the same ground control as Sonic while having a lower top speed, and can spin jump just like him. Of course, pressing the jump button in the air allows him to fly, ascending while holding it down, and descending otherwise, with the action gauge serving as his flight meter. It refills a tad differently than Sonic since it serves a different purpose, with no delay when hitting the ground and a faster recharge rate. Overall, while his ground speed is a little on the slow side, Tails feels great to control, which allows us to easily navigate his section and reach the switch. There is a time limit here, but it's so ridiculously long that there's a near zero chance to fail this part. With the gate closed, Sonic launches over it and enters the Mach Speed section. Project 06 divides its stages into sections like Sonic Adventure, with a loading screen in between them. So we'll just wait for— oh my god, we're already here. Yeah, since it's a from-the-ground-up remake in a new engine, the load times are basically non-existent on a mid to high-end PC, which of course improves the pacing of the game dramatically. On to the Mach Speed section. The opening of it drops Sonic directly onto a beach, where he then starts running forward very quickly. Sonic can't stop himself for whatever reason, which sort of makes this gameplay style like an auto runner, with obstacles and enemies to avoid in his path as he races toward the egg carrier. As with many elements from the original game, Project 06 does a great job of retaining the original spirit of these sections while making them much more fun to play. Sonic has the ability to change his direction in midair, and can use the secondary action button to perform a slide to slow himself down. The control stick can also be held forward or backward to speed him up or slow him down respectively. With all these control changes, these sections are super fun, though they do still have a bit of a learning curve. Thankfully, Sonic only takes damage now when running into a hazard like a spike ball or enemy, or if he runs into a wall at too high a speed. The light dash can also be used here and is very helpful for course correcting. Additionally, if the control stick is held forward during a light dash, Sonic will then run even faster after the dash and have speed lines around him. This faster state allows him to barrel through enemies and destroy weaker objects, but needs great skill to control with how fast he's moving. A fantastic risk versus reward system. This section also has a couple instances of a left versus right path, and it's the only time it happens in Mach Speed. Once Sonic hits the goal ring, it'll show the unused mission completed text from the original game, along with some updated visuals like the mission box being filled in. Also, Sonic's victory animation properly loops now rather than him just standing there like a statue. And with that, Sonic's Wave Ocean is complete. Actually, there's one more thing I want to talk about. In the Shadow release of Project 06, the version that came out in 2021 that just contained Sonic and Shadow stories, there was this really cool trick that you could do in this section. Roof launches. With some clever play, Sonic could badnik bounce off of an enemy, then utilize the sharp slope of the hut roofs to soar into the air, even being able to touch the egg carrier. They were omitted in the current release due to a greater fix that stopped Sonic from getting launched by random small objects in other Mach Speed sections that would break them or cause death. However, in Wave Ocean specifically, these were such cool tricks, and a showstopper when showcasing the game during speedrunning events and such. It would be a joy if they were brought back for this section. What are you doing?
I'm waiting for you to do it.
What are you... Oh my gosh, that was for one video.
But you gotta...
Oh my goodness. Do I have to deal with this every time I do roof
But the roof!
Come on. While there are some problems, Sonic's Wave Ocean does a great job setting the stage for what's to come in PO6, and showcases the nuance of the characters and levels they traverse. Did I say nuance? Well, let's throw that out the window for a second. Tails' version of Wave Ocean, which is redundant to say since he was already playable in the regular version of the stage, is lesser in every way to Sonic's. Diving into more of what Tails can do, he has dummy ring bombs that are pretty unremarkable on the ground, but he is able to throw them with auto-aim or manually in first person. It's much more useful in the air via the dummy ring blitz. It doesn't break his flight, despite the animation being a tad goofy, and when the capsule makes contact with an object or enemy, not only does it do damage, but it also releases 10 dummy rings that do damage on contact as well. This is the best part of the stage. Since most of the level design doesn't accommodate for his flight, spamming the dummy rings to carpet bomb all the enemies below him is where the fun lies. It also gets another point for being a good showcase of my favorite implementation of Tails' flight. Remember when I mentioned that flying uses up the action gauge? Well, Tails can defeat enemies while in flight, meaning that their chaos drives will continue to fill the action gauge, extending his flight time. Like, that beats the crap out of just grabbing a balloon, and since enemies are everywhere in these stages, it gives so many different opportunities for Tails to extend his flight and find new routes. That's so cool. The tail swipe is also here, retaining its rhythm badge functionality from the upgrade in Sonic Adventure. What's even better is being able to tail swipe in the air. This allows for Tails to cancel his flight, and he's also able to reinitiate it after performing the move. This is great for all the same reasons the flight cancel rocks when added to the classic games through mods, but also for being able to defeat foes quickly while maintaining your flight path. Tails' hit is so sick, and it sucks that his own stage does not do a good job at all testing or taking advantage of his abilities. Other than a few springs removed in some places and some added in others, it's identical to how Sonic traverses Section 1. What's worse is getting to the part where you normally switch to Tails, as here it's exactly the same other than some enemies, which don't matter anyway because you can just fly over them. I'm fully aware that this is an extra stage at the end of the playthrough, but even as something as simple as removing some of the islands or adding some more enemies in the air that take advantage of the new air tail swipe would be dope. Also, super funny that Eggman doesn't banter with Tails at all here like he does with Sonic. I like to think he just thinks less of him. The third iteration of Wave Ocean in P06 is with Shadow, and his is quite different. He starts at the end of the Mach Speed section and uses the hang glider to fly his way through. This is just one of the many instances of Shadow's vehicles, all of which are less fun than his standard gameplay, but I would say necessary to keep in as they were a big part of his playthrough. But it would be cool if they were optional. The hang glider here actually is optional using some tricks with Shadow we'll talk about in a minute, but it's certainly not intended. That's not a bad thing though, and could even be considered for an achievement if those get added to the game. The hang glider is a lot more fun though in P06 than it is in the original game because it's actually free range here rather than being on a scripted path. After having an existential crisis and making it through the hang glider section, we start in Sonic's first section as Omega. Really quickly want to note the obvious time of day difference here, as Shadow's Wave Ocean takes place at sunset. This is a wonderful change, breathing new life into a stage that's played the most. It's my favorite iteration of it visually. Now it's time to talk guns. Omega works as a fusion of his Hero's counterpart and the mechs from Sonic Adventure 2. The lock-on shot works almost identical to the latter, except now it only locks on to 5 targets maximum. Since this game has enemies with multiple hit points, the shot is balanced by only doing 1 point of damage. If you think that's too low, don't worry. Your boy's got you covered with his other moves. His 3-hit combo attack returns from Heroes, dealing massive damage in a pretty small radius. I'd have more issue with it if he weren't completely invincible during each hit of the combo, but the fun's just getting started, because new to Omega's moveset is Gatling Guns mode. This is one of my favorite aspects of P06, taking inspiration from moves only seen in cutscenes and adding them as part of the gameplay, but also factoring in that this is a game and limiting the new powers in a way that makes sense. Omega can't jump while in Gatling Guns mode, but he can obliterate anything he wants to with rapid-fire bullets. There's also incentive to be careful, as the only way to refill ammo is from light cores. Wait, I thought they were chaos drives. I didn't make any mistake. The Iblis creatures do drop light cores instead of chaos drives. There's no functional difference other than being yellow instead of blue. For the sake of simplicity, I'll refer to both light cores and chaos drives as energy cores. Anyway, moving on. Omega can also jump and hover, with his hover taking up energy in the action gauge. While in the air, the melee combo will instead be an air shot, which does more single fire damage than the lock-on shot. With how spammable his other abilities are, and Omega not really being that good in the air to begin with, since his hover's limited and he has the most air drag out of everyone, the air shot isn't terribly useful. Omega really does have a kick-ass moveset, and it's super fun to go around and wreck everything with him, but it does have one problem. He doesn't spin jump. Now, I know it looks ridiculous for a bulky robot to curl up and spin around in the air. About as ridiculous as a super fast blue hedgehog that beats up a fat doctor, but I digress. But this is a core mechanic in the series. The Bandit bounce has taken many forms, and is much better in P06 than it is in any official 3D game. I don't care if Omega actually spin jumps, even though I had no problem with it in Heroes or Shadow. But I would like him to still have the mechanic of it. Maybe blades come out of his center like Gamma or something. Talking about his section, it utilizes the space pretty well. Every combat encounter keeps the enemies close, but not bunched up on top of each other to make it easy to experiment with Omega's moves, and it's short, probably as long as Tails' introduction in Sonic's Wave Ocean. Eventually, you'll find Mephiles, and Omega will threaten him, with control shifting back over to Shadow. This wide open space that's exclusive to him will make for a sort of hunt to find the switch that opens the gate, which doesn't take too long with his improved abilities. Shadow is identical to Sonic in his base movement, the spin dash, jump dash / homing attack, and the light dash. Where he differs the most is in his air action and his spin kick. These moves for Sonic we'll talk about later, but for Shadow, these are pivotal to his gameplay. Firstly though, when Shadow homing attacks an enemy with more than one hit point, he'll perform the Chaos attack. This is a 5-hit combo he can do to defeat tougher foes, but funnily enough is slower than just spamming the homing attack with Sonic, while also having a delay at the end of the combo. The difference doesn't really matter, as Sonic Fox's sick as hell animations more than make up for the milliseconds of time difference, but it's funny to me that Shadow could defeat these enemies faster if he didn't have the special combat move. His version of the spin kick is called the Tornado Kick, and it's the most broken move in the game. Shadow's story retains the combat-focused gameplay of the original, so the moves he uses to beat down foes are super important, as the enemies usually lock progression in his stages. To put it simply, the Tornado Kick can be used while moving, preserve speed so you can cancel a spin dash with it to move really fast, pressing the button 2 more times increases its radius. The radius itself is a full sphere so it can hit enemies underground or slightly above him, it does constant damage while active, and it does 2 points of damage per hit. So yeah, enemies just melt with this move. It's totally busted, and I already know it's being balanced in the next update, but it's too fun to not talk about it. In the air, Shadow can use the Chaos Spear, which stuns up to 5 targets, and can be charged to instead deal 1 point of damage. He can use up to 3 before touching the ground or homing attacking an enemy or object to refresh them, recovering from each one with a little bounce upward. This is called a Spear Bounce, a small but cool piece of tech that allows Shadow to basically double jump or stagger 3 smaller jumps over a large distance. These combat moves can be used to take out a few of the groups of enemies, but the goal is to just find the switch, which is in the cave guarded by a few purple golems. I feel this part of the stage is underutilized. Considering the wide open space, it could be a good spot for a treasure hunt with Rouge, which is something we'll be seeing in other stages. But now, we get to talk new level design. In the original game, Shadow would defeat these enemies near the lighthouse and immediately be put onto the hover car, another one of his vehicles he uses to cross water. But Project 06 decides to add a small platforming section for Shadow to complete before he reaches it, and it's really fun. Adds a nice bit of conveyance as well for the hovercar part, as the path wasn't too clear before. After saying hi to Rouge, we end Shadow's Wave Ocean. It's very well remixed and feels quite different from Sonic's, and Tails's I guess, considering we actually travel backwards through the sections for most of it. Wave Ocean is relegated to the extra stage with Blaze and Silver's story, and this might just be the best one. Fundamentally, the stage is very similar to Tails' version, which is basically the same as Sonic's, but 2 things make it feel unique. The first one is the gorgeous sunrise setting the level takes place at. Just like Shadow's, changing the time of day does wonders for giving the stage a different feel. The second reason is that we're playing as Blaze, who's awesome. She has a double jump, a spinning fire tornado attack, and a pounce attack. Also, she gets the homing attack in the form of the Fire Claw, working just a tad differently than Sonic or Shadow's. It can be activated on the ground or in the air, has a lot of control given over its trajectory, and can be reactivated after it ends. The Fire Claw and double jump are what you'll be using the most, especially because if a Fire Claw is used after a double jump, Blaze can do another jump. This makes her way more aerial than the base hedgehogs, allowing for a different type of Sonic gameplay while still feeling similar to them. There's added level design to the end of this stage as well that's also cool, with a couple hidden shortcuts thrown in for added replay value. And that's it, a fun stage with a fun character. I think this level succeeds where Tails' Wave Ocean doesn't, in that Blaze still has to engage with most of the level design instead of just flying over all of it. And it's just really awesome to play as her in 3D. Whew, that was a lot of Wave Ocean. Let's move on. Next up, we have Sonic's Dusty Desert, where we are introduced to yet another playstyle. Upon entering the stage, we are dropped onto an open platform that gives us the chance to run around and learn our abilities. Okay, I'm done slandering Sonic's Wave Ocean. This is Sonic carrying Princess Elise, one of the weakest playstyles in the game, which doesn't help because Sonic's Dusty Desert does a fantastic job of giving the player multiple unique routes through the stage, which would be even more fun if we had a more capable character. Sonic has quite the nerfed moveset in this playstyle, as he can only jump, which isn't a spin jump, homing attack, slide, which is a move he has normally, but the spin dash is easily easily a better version of, light dash, and activate a shield. The gems aren't available either. This shield slowly drains the action gauge, allowing Sonic to walk on top of the quicksand, protect against touch damage, and run through enemies. Most of the time. The hitbox on the shield could be a little bigger, as the foes with larger hitboxes can still damage Sonic while it's active. Either that or just make the character invincible. There's a fun fact here in that if you use a character switch mod to play as regular Sonic, or any other character for that matter, they're actually able to walk on top of the quicksand and jump out of it. I guess Elise really is that heavy. While I normally detest this playstyle, I've actually come around to enjoying its inclusion. Carrying Princess Elise takes away Sonic's ability to quickly gain speed other than the light dash and the slide. With the slide in P06 functioning almost like the roll from the classic games, except it preserves speed on flat surfaces rather than losing it, which makes things so interesting and changes the mindset all the way back to the original Sonic 1. In that game, it was up to the player to use the level's geometry to their advantage to gain and maintain speed, as the spin dash wasn't yet introduced. The same philosophy applies here. Sonic can use the light dash slide combo to gain speed in certain places, then maintain it, or use a jump dash to kickstart the slide instead. The level is riddled with sand dunes too, and in P06, Sonic doesn't sink instantly like the original, and will instead fall slowly into the sand. So efficient use of this along with the shield allows him to cross a good amount of distance at high speeds, for this playstyle anyway. I would prefer to play as just Sonic, but I can understand why the Princess style is still here. Having somewhat of an idea for Chaos's vision for the project, it wouldn't be right to outright omit an entire playstyle that was present in the original. At the end of the day, there's always the character switcher mod to allow you to play any of these stages with any character. From the very start of the stage, we can either choose to go forward, or if we look around, there's a hidden spring we can take to go on an entirely different path. Dusty Desert is full of moments like this, just like Wave Ocean is, which makes it really fun to replay and route out. One of its coolest moments is near the end. Normally, Sonic has to run around and up a tower, which is a slow journey full of enemies and hazards. However, a little ways up it, you can see an enemy sitting on the side of the wall. If Sonic were to use a homing attack, it leads to a huge chain that lets you scale the tower much faster. But that's not all. If you take the rainbow ring after the loop section a little bit earlier, it launches Sonic toward a spring, which then follows into a chain jumping sequence that skips the tower climb entirely. While the fastest route is the most automated, the multi-tiered shortcuts is such a cool idea. I hope that future games, fan game or official, implement more of them. Finally, the speed shoes are introduced in this stage, which only make an appearance in Sonic's story. They work like the classic games, upping the speed cap on the ground and in the air to a ridiculous degree. With the increase of the airspeed cap, Sonic can perform some pretty cool slope launches that just send him flying. It's a great way to spice up the middle section, which is normally pretty slow. Shadow and Silver stories take place inside the temple, for the most part. Shadow has a hover car section in the outdoor portion where you have to drive through the pillars to open the temple door, but it can be bypassed due to the trigger for opening the door being set right next to it. It would definitely benefit from Shadow being on foot here. He's got air shoes, so it's easy to justify why he wouldn't fall into the quicksand as long as he keeps moving. It'd be a faster but riskier strategy, whereas the player could still jump into the hover car if they wanted to take a safer route. Anywho, despite the space being filled with narrow corridors, Shadow and Silver traverse the ruins quite differently. Shadow's version, while quite uninspired mechanically, is actually really fun to execute. It's got a good rhythm to it, especially with the tornado kick. The rooms with the sand waves are also unique, as they contain some of the little RNG P06 has, and the player has to be careful not to get caught in one. Oh, did I say Shadow's version? I meant Omega's version. He does most of the heavy lifting here, which is fine because it's fun as hell to tear apart these combat rooms with his arsenal. Dusty Desert is also the only stage with pole swings for Shadow, so naturally I want to mention that he strikes the SA2 pose during the animation. It'd also be very cool if Rouge were following Shadow throughout the stage, as she's meant to be there for the confrontation against Mephiles. Having all of Team Dark in the results screen would also be a great touch. Silver starts in a different spot than Shadow, and all of the corridors are traversed in the opposite direction until the end. Weedhead here is the oddball of the three main hogs. He's not able to spin jump, or spin dash, and defeats enemies through manipulating the environment around them with his psychokinesis. With how overhauled his moveset is in P06, it's a fun shakeup to the usual Sonic formula. Silver can either pick up objects around him and throw them at foes, or stun them to pick them up directly and crush them. The Psycho Smash stuns in a close range to him, the Psycho Shock is a ground pound that stuns in a radius around him, and the Psychic Shot is a long-range projectile that stuns far away from him and has homing properties for the cost of some action gauge, based on the cutscene of his first encounter with Sonic. For traversal, Silver can hover or teleport dash if the jump button is double tapped. The dash is sort of useful to bring Silver up to speed, and in other stages it can be used on slopes to carry that speed further, but hovering is usually better. Fans of the original game will be pleased to hear that you can still stagger Silver's hover to get extra distance, but it's not nearly as broken, using up more meter and not staying at the same altitude. soon. The only problem I have with Silver's kit is that the Psycho Smash is so good, you'll be using it constantly to stun enemies to defeat them quickly. It creates this stop and go sort of gameplay that has a decent rhythm, but doesn't feel very Sonic-y. I have thought of a way that could improve things, but first we'll talk about Amy. Dusty Desert is her only playable appearance currently, which is a shame because she's super fun. With a good run speed, double jump, hammer jump that goes more horizontal to compensate for that double jump, and hammer attacks, including one where she spins around, she's just a blast to play as. Wait, this is the wrong footage. Yeah, Blaze and Amy are quite similar. So much, in fact, I'd call her a worse version of the purple cat. She gets dizzy with her spinning attack, whereas Blaze doesn't have a homing attack, and is overall slower. But I wouldn't call it an issue, because she's got a different enough feel to her playstyle. Using a character switch to put Blaze in this section, I don't play it the same way at all. Plus, Sonic Fox's animations once again spice things up because they're so damn good. For the level itself, Silver's Dusty Desert still has the ball puzzles, and they're quite fun. The billiards don't have a global timer like they did originally. They go where you expect them to, and Silver can grab them with his psychokinesis to bring them to a stop. The ending puzzle has had its layout changed a bit, with some ramps and walls added to make it more difficult to fall into the wrong hole. The ending part also sucks the ball in case you were almost out of shots. One frustrating thing is that, to fix another glitch from an earlier version where you could cheese the puzzles by hitting the ball with other objects or teleport dashing into them, it was changed so that anything hitting the ball that wasn't Silver's Psycho Smash would cancel its momentum, including Silver himself. So if you accidentally ram into the ball on the last ramp, it'll just fall right down into the wrong hole for seemingly no reason. Not great for repeat playthroughs or when going for a good time. Before the last puzzle though, a keen eye will spot some rings in a peculiar pattern against the statues. If you solve the riddle, it'll open up a new pathway and lead to one of Silver's upgrades, the Lotus of Resilience. This flower allows Silver to spin jump, hooray, and grants him full use of the teleport dash, lasting as long as his action gauge allows. It's a wonderful upgrade, and makes Silver feel more Sonic-y while still having a different way to speed through the stages. The campaign is fun without it, but this takes his playthrough up a notch. This type of power-up is where I'd suggest the extra attribute for Silver to immediately start running after a Psycho Shock rather than playing the animation. He can defeat any enemy in one hit as long as they're stunned anyway, so it really isn't much more powerful than his current kit, and it would allow the player to make the choice if they want to defeat the foes or just stun them and move on. However, I wouldn't apply this change to the Lotus specifically, as I think that would be too many benefits for one singular upgrade, but rather another upgrade that we'll see later on in his story. Continuing on into White Acropolis, this features Sonic's fourth unique gameplay style, the snowboard. Man, they really shoved all the gimmicks into his first three stages. Comparable to SA2's City Escape, the snowboard has a good weight to it, and taking into consideration the less flat terrain than that stage, the PO6 team added a kick dash to Sonic's moveset here by pressing the spin dash button, allowing him to build up speed anywhere, including if he were to get stuck. Jumping off of ramps has been made much clearer too. Any surface that has these glowing arrows can be jumped off of by holding the jump button and releasing it at the right time, which if done correctly will show Sonic doing a cool flip in the air. This animation was unused in the original game, but the particle effects are new to PO6. There's no variation in how far you jump based on speed like Adventure 2, nor how long the jump is charged like Sonic Riders, and because of that, I feel the charging mechanic is needless. It could be simplified by just pressing the jump button at the right time. The section ends with Sonic being chased downhill by a snowball, which is mostly just a spectacle set piece as there isn't much for him to avoid when going down the slope. I like to think that the enemies near the top of the hill are the ones who formed it, and they are so screwed when Eggman finds out about the property damage. It's immediately apparent as well that, compared to the first two stages, White Acropolis' terrain is a lot more bumpy and windy than what we've seen in the game up to this point, and there's likely a reason for that. Looking through the game's set files, those are the files that contain the assets and information for the stages, there's a comment on White Acropolis specifically that strongly suggests the terrain and collision were outsourced to another team, which explains the different feel the stage has. After the final jump, Sonic hops off the snowboard and goes right into section 2, where the different stage feel becomes even more noticeable. Rather than being a clear path like Wave Ocean, Dusty Desert, or even the snowboarding section of this stage, White Acropolis is instead a giant circle that's sectioned off by hazards. Sonic has to run around the outer ring of the area, meet up with Tails who will then open a gate for him, which then plops him to the inner part, a massive snowy field with many directions to take. Tails' section is fine. Again, it really doesn't do a good job testing his abilities, as his flight is just too good for the challenges challenges the section gives. I very much like the idea that the player can fly over these laser barriers if they know where to start their flight, but some more enemies and obstacles for this top route would make it more fun, as right now it's basically just a line with one turn. In some cases, ChaosX does a great job adding in small details to give meaning to the character swap mechanic, unlike the original game. When Tails hit the switch there, Sonic would just spawn beyond the door when it opens, as if he found another way around or something. Where in ChaosX, there's a bit of new level design added to show Sonic actually having to get to the door that Tails opens. It's a really small thing, but does a lot in making it feel like these guys are working as a team to make it through the stage. More of these additions would be awesome, like keeping the doors closed in Shadow and Silver's Dusty Deserts to justify switching to their amigos there. Speaking of other amigos, where's Knuckles? While not having story cutscenes, ChaosX does follow the events of the original game, where Knuckles joins up with them before heading into the stage. Even if he weren't playable, it would make a lot of sense to at least have him follow Sonic and Tails here, or maybe have him appear near the goal ring. Regardless, Sonic now has to traverse through a huge open area to get to the end, if it weren't so easily broken. Sonic characters operate at their best when they're slightly overpowered for the stages they run through, as that allows for the player a great degree of freedom when creating a route for the stage. But White Acropolis takes it too far in the wrong direction and just gets decimated. Sonic can basically take a straight line from the checkpoint to the end of the stage with little interference from enemies or hazards, and not really have to engage with the design at all. But also, if the player were to do that, they would be missing out on all sorts of goodies that lie around the open snowscape. Also, quick side note, because I just thought about this, the characters having frost breath in this stage along with the reflective ice on the ground is awesome, and the trees in this stage are actually swaying with the wind. I look forward to seeing how many little tiny details like this get added in the last release. One of the rewards for exploration is Sonic's next gem ability, the Sky Gem. This one is quite famous for how utterly busted it was in the original game, and Project 06 keeps the fun factor while not having it shatter the game in half. The Sky Gem works somewhat like an Ender Pearl. While equipped, Sonic can hold the activation button to charge up a throw and aim it. When it's released, Sonic throws it, and wherever it lands, he will be launched to its landing point. Unlike the Ender Pearl though, Sonic physically travels the distance, and the farther away he is, the faster the launch becomes. Sonic keeps his speed upon reaching the gem, which can be utilized to sort of slingshot him in different directions, but none are more useful than against walls. The main benefit of the Sky Gem comes from using it while airborne. When thrown, Sonic chucks the gem in a set arc and speed, and if it lands against a vertical surface, he'll be pulled toward it, then launched upward 9 times out of 10. The angle is important, and it really just takes practice to find out what the bad ones are that spike you downward. This is fantastic for what's effectively an extra jump, but Sonic does have to land on the ground before he can throw it again, so it's not too overpowered. The other two Hedgehog's versions of the stage showcase just how small it is, because everyone goes in the same way. I like it for Shadow because this is his introductory level. He opts to run down the slopes of the first section rather than snowboard, which is really fun with the spin dash, especially on repeat playthroughs to see how long you can go without breaking it. After a combat encounter about halfway down the slopes, he'll jump into a portal and Control will switch over to Rouge for section 2. The Bat comes equipped with her martial arts kicks and ability to climb and glide on walls. Her drill drive is buffed to emit a shockwave that stuns enemies, and she can throw bombs on the ground or in the air like Tails. Though no dummy rings this time, she opts for a more realistic approach. Despite the simple moveset, it's still good, and contrasts the borderline feature bloat of moves from the other characters. And we're not even done talking about the 3 main hogs yet. While some of the characters' moves are unnecessary or overlap with a lot of their other actions, the extra moves don't intrude on each character's gameplay because they're so well mapped input-wise. Rouge's section ends with a neat cutscene using some unused dialogue between her and Shadow. A few of these will pop up throughout ChaosX, and I really hope to see more. There's such a fun way to integrate some story and character into the stages itself, while not having to sit through a movie with a game accompanying it. There's such a fun way to integrate some story and character into the stages themselves while not having to sit through a movie with a game accompanying it. Shadow's White Acropolis has a unique ending to it. Instead of just getting to the goal ring, he must break all 5 searchlights in the area, which can be done with either his own move kit or by annihilating them entirely with the buggy. The buggy is another of Shadow's vehicles, which is Silver's White Acropolis is barren. Section 1 sees Blaze running down the slopes this time, going all the way through the snowball chase sequence herself. There's a part where you have to defeat some enemies to shut down lasers, which was possible to skip in a previous version by skillfully using her abilities. Would love to see that come back. In the second half with Silver, there is some cool tech to get some rock launches via the teleport dash, but this part is like taking Tails' section, which was just a line with a turn, and expanding it to the entire second half, still being just a line with one turn. But I don't know if I want it changed. I like the idea that Silver just plows through Eggman's defenses, or maybe that he's arrived after Sonic, so a lot of things have already been taken care of and Eggman has already abandoned the place for Aquatic base. It's hard for this one. I want there to be more, but I also kind of like it the way it is. An oddity in this stage is that, story-wise, Sonic and Silver are trying to infiltrate the base, but Shadow's trying to escape, and they all end the stage in the same location. Obviously, it's done this way because the level's so small, but I feel Shadow's second half could have been remixed to where he goes through Section 2 backwards. The Searchlight gimmick could still be used as well to simulate breaking down the defenses. Taking a break from yapping about the stages for a bit, let's talk about PO6 outside of the levels. First, there's a plethora of graphics options to best suit your PC, though the game still needs a mid to high-end one to run properly. If you're having frame rate issues, the best options to try changing first are the reflections and the shadows. After that, it's just kind of turning things up and down to see what works. I especially like the ability to disable the motion blur. It seems to be a coin flip in official games whether this is an option or it's a mod. There are also two areas to modify the game in some way: the game options or the game room. The game options are where the less flattering customization is, like inverting the camera movement or turning off the jiggle bones, which affects things like Sonic and Shadow's quills moving. One of them that I want to highlight here is the option to turn off the camera volumes. This disables most of the cinematic camera events that happen in the stages. It's such an interesting feature. I like playing the game with them on, but for those who aren't as big of fans of the camera flying around all the time, turning them off is a great solution for that. The other one I want to discuss further is the option to enable or disable the in-game cutscenes. It does as expected, mostly. The flavor text at the bottom states that it turns off the non-mandatory cutscenes in stages. Those ones being Omega's Wave Ocean cutscene against Mephiles, and the other we haven't gotten to yet. I'll give that when the cutscenes are off, Omega's is sped up, but it isn't mandatory. Neither of these cutscenes are mandatory. Omega could simply run to the spot and it would switch to Shadow, and Sonic could just defeat the enemies to open the door. If the devs want to keep those ones on no matter what, fine, but I would like to see the option have the selections changed to on and light, because off just doesn't make any sense. They're not all off. Now for the flashier stuff, the game room. There are a ton of cool things here, like switching between different spin effects for the characters based on the other 3D games, or changing Sonic's gem shoes to look more in line with his regular design. While most of them are cosmetic, there are two that change how the game plays. One is the camera type, with Retail offering a closer perspective and E3 farther away, though you could also mix and match the field of views from each one. If you want the camera pulled way back, use the Retail camera with the E3 FOV, and the inverse if you want it super close up. Because the Retail camera has a faster speed though, it's actually closer to Sonic while in Mach speed sections. While that may be how it works, it'd be nice to see a custom camera made for these sections so it's more in line with the view the rest of the time. The other, most important one is the jump dash type. Straight, as you've seen up till now, works like Retail 06. But Legacy, oh man, Legacy is fantastic. It's inspired by Sonic Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog. Not only is this the strongest jump dash type in terms of speed and distance, but it's also influenced by the character's current predicament. That is, it'll have an upward arc if it's moving up, and a downward arc when it's going down. This one is extremely fluid, and makes PO6 way more fun despite only affecting Sonic and Shadow. I mean, you do play as them for majority of their stories, though. Oh, there's also the curved jump dash, which is just a worse Legacy in every sense, being less powerful and only sending the hedgehogs downward. It's a nice thought. These two menus kind of feel like they should be one giant one, as something like the camera type and UI customization could easily fit into the game options, or conversely, the jiggle bones and character sway could fit into the game room. If in the next release the options in the game room were unlocks, then the separation would make more sense.
Shadow, don't be late. You're talking to me?
At the start of Crisis City, Sonic jumps into his second snowboarding section, where he actually has double the top speed of the snowboard in White Acropolis. A good change considering that this stage is a lot more spaced out versus the denser, sharper turns of the previous one. With some style thrown into the mix, the section ends as quickly as it showed up, and now we head into the stage proper. For the longest time considered to be the best stage from the original game, Crisis City holds up very well. The visuals are great, the music is top-notch, and the pacing is fantastic. Shadow, also starting in the same spot as the blue guy, instead goes through section 1 on foot, and it's awesome. Like his White Acropolis, it's fun as hell to let the spin dash do its thing, and with the more spaced out design and smoother slopes, rolling down them is so satisfying. Section 2 is almost identical between the two hogs, with only some enemy encounters and item boxes being varied up. It doesn't feel different enough, and I'd like to see maybe some character switching overlap in this section. It's well known that a more robust multiplayer tag mode was planned for 06, with a bunch of unused lines between Sonic and Shadow. so I feel the concept could be realized here. Both hogs already cross over with Silver at some point, so playing as another main hog in a different story isn't new. We've seen grind rails sprinkled throughout Wave Ocean and White Acropolis, but here in Crisis City, we finally get to utilize them to the fullest. Grinding on rails is more like Sonic Unleashed or Generations than it is Adventure 2 or Heroes. There's no balancing mechanic, which for how short the grinding sections are isn't too big of a loss, and the characters can gain speed by pressing the spin dash button, though you'll automatically gain speed regardless. Just like I said in my Shadow Generations video, it's sad to see how much more automated rail grinding has become since its inception, but PO6 has a pretty nice blend of the old and new styles without having an overwhelming amount of features. The unused rail switch mechanic is added back here too, including the animations that were made for it. It's incredibly reliable, just like Shadow the Hedgehog's own game. This section is quite linear, with a few shortcuts here and there in both stories, though it is more expansive than something like Dusty Desert's interior. For Sonic, this is where we're introduced to the yellow gem. This one emits the thunder shield around him while activated, and will slowly drain the action gauge. While active, the shield will absorb damage by using up the meter instead of losing rings, and also attracts rings to Sonic. This can cause issues with light dash trails though, so be careful. A solution to this could be to have intended light dash trails work like Shadow 05, where ghost rings appear to dash on if they're already collected, though I understand if the shortcuts are meant to be a one-time thing. If the thunder shield doesn't suit your fancy, or you're playing as a different character, the original green shield was added back into PO6, as it went unused in the original game. However, if you activate the yellow gem with the green shield, the thunder shield will override it and Sonic will lose it even after deactivating the yellow gem, something to be aware of. This is where it's good to mention that the gems can't be used in Mach Speed sections. It didn't really matter up until this point, but yeah, you can't have the thunder shield in Mach Speed, so if you want a shield, make sure to keep the green one and don't use the yellow gem. After navigating Section 2, both hogs will be launched upward into Section 3. Sonic's version has a top, middle, and low route going on like the classic games, but unlike those, the top route isn't always the fastest. There's some pole swinging to get from platform to platform, but overall there's barely any automation until the end, which allows for some fun high-speed platforming. Shadow's version is a required hang glider section. It would have to be heavily adjusted to make it optional, but it'd be dope if Shadow were allowed to leave the hang glider at the very least, then try to navigate the section on foot anyway with a combo of spear bounces and spin dashes. Since the section isn't that interesting, let's talk about Shadow's ability to do 2 jump dashes, called the jump dash refresh. If he's already performed one, launching the Chaos Spear refreshes the ability to do it again. This includes the homing attack as well, so it can help him cross huge distances. He only gets 1 extra jump dash per set of 3 spears though, so it's not that insane. We'd also love to see Shadow on the hang glider in the background of Sonic's section and vice versa for Shadow's section with Sonic jumping around on the debris. The final part of Crisis City for Sonic is his Mach Speed section, which is mostly spectacle. There is a challenge where if the player's too slow, Sonic will get caught in the tornado and lose a life, but thankfully he'll respawn at the beginning of the section and not the entire stage. One good thing from the original game that carried over to here. Speaking of the original, the amount of debris being thrown around in PO6 is quite tame comparatively, and with the better Mach Speed control, this section's quite a bit more manageable. The Mach 3 state Sonic can achieve through light dashing helps a lot as well, as he can just barrel through enemies and weaker hazards with no issues, and you only have to worry about the big stuff. For Shadow, he's dropped into a unique section that Sonic never visits. It's more of the same that Section 2 offered, so there's not anything new to talk about here, but it is just good old platforming. Silver's Crisis City is a whole different beast. For starters, this stage is one of a kind in that Silver will start in one section, head to another for Section 2, then head back to the first section to finish the stage. His first and third part are actually both halves of Shadow's final section, where he normally navigates between them with springs and a giant rail set piece. Silver, of course, has the benefit of his gameplay style to give a different feel to the stage despite going the same direction as Shadow, and has the added benefit of it being set at nighttime. Seriously, these time of day changes are so freaking good. Things are a bit slow and simple, but this is Silver's first level. Though, the stage does bring a new object, the girder, that Silver can activate using the rune on top to bend it and launch upward. These runes are fairly prevalent in Silver's other stages as justifications to manipulate large objects or maintain their state in ways Silver can't do normally. Their gimmicks are mostly fine, but some stages like Dusty Desert use them sometimes to open doors, whereas for other characters the doors either just open on their own or when defeating enemies guarding them. It's kind of needless, and it would be awesome if Silver instead could just grab the doors and use them like any other Psycho telekinesis object. Section 2 has Blaze go through the end of Sonic and Shadow Section 2, but in reverse. Not much to say, it's Blaze, she feels awesome to play. The final section is lacking. In the original game, Sonic Team got a lot of mileage out of these stages because Silver was slow as shit. But in some cases like this one, the more powerful Hedgehog we have in PO6 makes parts like this feel lame. I have to start out with talking about how beautiful Flame Core looks now, especially Section 1. The addition of the smoke and new effects around the volcano, along with the northern lights in the sky, breathe a sort of life into a place that's so desolate. This is easily my favorite stage in the game. Section 1's level design is top-notch. While not having significant multiple pathways to explore, the creativity of navigating the linear path that is there is so fun. But first, we have to talk about our new gem, the red gem. This one's a meme within the Project 06 community because all it does is slow down time at the cost of the action gauge. Unlike the original game, Sonic is also slowed down while using it. This gem was so broken in the original because it didn't slow down Sonic, but did slow down everything else, including the in-game timer, allowing for massive time bonuses and easy S ranks. Plus, enemies were so slow that Sonic could take them out before they even had a chance to spawn in. While more balanced here, it's not really much of a power-up. My suggestion is to not slow Sonic down, but slow down everything else excluding the timer. So there would still be an advantage to the player with the stage and its gimmicks still being slow, but the advantage is not so ridiculous it makes the S rank free. Moving on to the level itself, Section 1 is full of high-speed platforming, making great use of spin dash jumping, bandit bouncing, and combat. With these force combat sections, now's the time to talk about one of Sonic's abilities that I've been holding off on, the bound attack. Working like the bounce bracelet from Adventure 2, Sonic is sent downward, where upon touching the ground he'll bounce back up. Chaining two of these together will result in Sonic being able to gain a bunch more height than he could with just a regular jump. But what does this have to do with combat? Well, on bigger enemies with multiple hit points, the bounce has a constantly active hitbox that'll do damage rapidly to them. This makes homing attacking into the bound attack one of the best ways to finish off the bigger fodder. Funnily enough, with the little delay between the homing attacks in PO6, spamming it on larger targets defeats them just a little bit faster. Of course, there are also the platforming applications for this move. It allows Sonic to reach higher areas on his own without the need for automation or a badnik bounce. He can also do the jump dash refresh like Shadow with the bound attack too. And with the legacy type equipped, the refresh allows for a pseudo drop dash, and it's awesome. Definitely one of the coolest things about playing as Sonic in this game. In Mach speed sections, the bound attack can be used as well to slow Sonic down super quickly. The last thing I want to mention in Section 1 is that meteors still randomly fall from the sky and can hit Sonic if he were to collide with them, or the other hedgehogs in their stories. I'm really not too bothered by this, except for when they hit you in automation. Other than that though, it's just kind of funny when it happens. While it has nothing to do with PO6 specifically, Section 2 of Flame Core has my favorite song in the franchise. It really captures the less is more idea when it comes to writing music. It has a somewhat somber and introspective tone that, while not too fitting for this character's story, really elevates the atmosphere for another one. It's great stuff. Section 2 follows a similar philosophy to Section 1, having a pretty linear path with small diversions here and there. There are some speed shoes added at the beginning of the section though, and because they're so fun to use, I would love to see how other characters interact with the power-up than just Sonic, so having them sprinkled around their sections would be awesome too. The darkness mechanic is pretty cool. In PO6, homing attacking the purple lights now causes a particle to come out and the camera will aim toward the next one. Now, it's in no way necessary to activate this first set, but I love that the attention to detail of PO6 is not just given in parts we're going to see over and over again, but for the first time experience as well. All parties and skill levels are taken into account when designing the game, and it really shows. After another small platforming and rail grinding section, we come to our second character for the story, and the final new character we need to talk about, Knuckles. Similar to Tails though, his opening section, guess what, doesn't really do a good job of showcasing what he's capable of. All he has to do is find 5 orbs and activate them, and funnily enough, if a character switcher mod is used, Sonic can just activate these himself. The level design design was also very clearly made for the blue guy, so it just sucks the Echidna gets shafted here. If the section were more catered toward Knuckles' skills, like the orbs being closer to the ceiling or being surrounded by a bunch of enemies, it'd be a lot more fun than just going straight from point to point. The positives we can discuss are his gliding and climbing, which is identical to Rouge's. It feels so good in this game.
Gliding has a good weight to it, and climbing has nice speed and responsiveness.
Another positive is that, like White Acropolis, when Knuckles opens the door, Sonic still has to traverse the section instead of just spawning on the other side. It's such a small thing, but it retains the continuity so well. After that, there's a small, mostly automated section, which brings us to the end of the stage. Now, I could just copy and paste everything I said about Sonic's Flame Core and swap out Sonic with Shadow and Knuckles with Rouge, because Shadow's Flame Core is the most egregious example of rehashing the level design. The combat encounters are different, the location of Rouge's orbs are different, but that's it. Oh wait, I forgot this one piece of terrain was added in Section 1 too. Very important. So, since we don't have to talk about the stage, and since there are combat encounters that actually aren't solved easily with the Tornado Kick, now's a great time to talk about Shadow's special ability. This Hedgehog's action gauge doesn't regenerate naturally, instead only being filled by the energy cores. But once full, Shadow can activate Chaos Boost, a powered up state that improves different moves he has based on its level. Level 1 introduces the Chaos Snap. Shadow will now teleport to his foes like Shadow Generations and do some extra damage to them in his Chaos attack. Holding the button will limit the chain of enemies to 5, but simply letting go before retargeting resets the counter, and it's actually faster to do so. There's also a somewhat hidden extra effect. As long as the button's held down, Shadow will lock onto whatever comes into range, even if he's done one or both of his jump dashes. This allows for some huge corner cuts, especially with spear bouncing, and is super satisfying to pull off. In Chaos Boost, the energy cores will now also fill up the maturity meter, which Shadow can then use to level up again when it's full. Level 2 grants the Chaos Lance, a souped up Chaos Spear. The base form is now the yellow charge variant, and charging it up will fire a lance that insta-kills any enemy for the cost of some extra energy in the action gauge. Max level unlocks the Chaos Blast, unleashing a huge burst of energy to decimate anything in its radius for, unsurprisingly, a heavy chunk of the action gauge. Also, just being in Chaos Boost will slowly drain the action gauge, and that drain speeds up with every increasing level. It can also be extended by collecting more energy cores, which you'll do anyway in combat, so a lot of mileage can be gotten out of this power. I really don't like how long it takes for Shadow to get up to full strength, or that activating Chaos Boost level 1 stops him dead in his tracks. Though for the former, I don't think that should be dealt with by changing his base capabilities. And what do I mean by his base capabilities? Well, you'll see. Silver's Flame Core marks the first time we're seeing him navigate the sections in the same direction as the other two hogs, with some variation though at the end of Section 2. Again, his gameplay makes the stage feel quite different, unlike Shadow. Badnik bouncing can also be used to great effect here. It actually has the most use in Silver's story. Man, the Lotus is just goated. The opening of the stage features a very small but welcome section as Blaze to start the level in a more appropriate location before switching to Silver for the remainder of it. This would be a perfect opportunity for an Easter egg. Allow Blaze to fire Claw through the geysers on the wall and continue playing the stage as her. Have the doors open automatically if you do so, and have her head to the end of Sonic and Shadow's part of Section 2, either with a goal ring or a portal leading to Silver's part. It would be sick. Anyway, Silver's variant of Flame Core goes left instead of right near the end of Section 2, leading to some different platforming challenges and ending with a boss fight.
The namesake of the stage here sends out shockwaves that are easily avoidable with the mighty power of rocks, then is vanquished by activating the rune up top.
It's certainly the most final feeling stage in the game, which is appropriate because it's meant to be Silver's last, but it's not that much grander than the others. Radical Train throws us into the fire with a time limit. There are 3 switches that Sonic must reach before the train itself hits a firebox. The switches themselves are unused models from the original game and make the stage feel way more, for the lack of a better term, train-yardy than the standard switches the game uses. Additionally, Elise is not on the train in Section 1. This is actually a separate train full of civilians. However, the dialogue line chosen to show that sounds a lot like Lacey Chabert. Many of the voice actors of the characters probably did voices for the civilians as well, which explains the overlap. So it could be her, just not as Princess Elise. Given the time limit, Section 1 is probably as linear as the interior of Dusty Desert, with route differences that are at most very slight detours to the actual paths. But there's one very minor, very important route difference, because it leads us to the Purple Gem. This one's seen the most rebalancing from the original game next to the Sky Gem, since that incarnation just allowed Sonic to infinitely jump. Instead of shrinking, activating the gem will envelop Sonic in a purple aura that slowly drains his action gauge. With it, he's he's able to do an extra jump, but is unable to homing attack after it. But that can be bypassed by quickly doing a bound attack to get the refresh, of course. That's it? Just one extra jump? Well, this is the perfect time to introduce the level up mechanic for the gems. As you've seen in the footage, when Sonic has a gem equipped and defeats an enemy, their energy core not only fills up the action gauge, but a small bit of the maturity meter as well. That same red meter we also use to level up Shadow's Chaos Boost. After collecting 3 of them, Sonic's equipped gem will level up, increasing the potency of its ability. An additional 3 cores after that will bring the gem to max level, and some of these get pretty insane. The green gem's tornado has a bigger radius, does more damage, and costs less of the action gauge to use. The sky gem causes Sonic to damage enemies during his flight toward it. The yellow gem becomes even more resilient and draws in rings from a further distance. This one is really good, especially for S ranks. And the red gem
Increases the duration of the time slow.
The purple gem gets an additional jump per level and allows Sonic to turn invisible at level 3. This also has a fun quirk to it. The gem only needs to be active when Sonic jumps, which means the player can very quickly press the activation button, jump, and then let go. The game will remember how many jumps Sonic has done regardless of the gem being active or not, so Sonic can get up to 4 jumps, including the initial one, for a very small cost. Is it a little broken? Perhaps,
But it does take a good amount of practice to develop the skill and timing to use the purple gem effectively, so I think it balances out.
this gem also synergizes very well with the speed shoes. And look at that, a pair sitting right next to where the gems picked up. I see you, Chaos. While linear, the end of section 1 does give us the choice between taking the low route, grinding on the rails, or running on the conveyor belts up top. Sonic, for some reason though, still insists that being on top of the trains is faster than the rails. But he's still wrong, the rails are much faster. With the final switch pressed, we then chase down Elise's train proper in the Mach Speed section. I really quickly want to draw attention to the music for this level. It's a very short one, so the songs for each section don't really have the time to get going. But man, it's no secret that 06 had good music. In fact, it's the only thing P06 doesn't change at all. But please listen to both section 1, The Abandoned Mine, and this section, The Chase. They're so good. Now let's talk Mach Speed. This one starts out very strong, with many twists, turns, and questionable kill planes. There isn't a lot of time to react to what's up ahead, so Sonic's ability to slow down via the slide and bound attack are extremely useful. And despite what the game's saying, there isn't a time limit at all, so you can take it as slow as you'd like. At a certain point, Sonic will be chasing the train directly as it drops explosive cars to try and stop him. It's actually impossible to catch up to the train before the end of the stage. Even at max speed, Sonic still can't reach it. That's gotta be some nitrous Eggman put in there. Once the train reaches the tunnel, that brings us to the end of the stage. It's seen a bit of a cosmetic facelift, with elements being brought over from the 15th anniversary render Chaos made depicting Silver's encounter with Sonic and Elise. It's a nice touch considering how barren it was in the original game. It really shows how long the man's been working on this game, as each of his renders perfectly capture the essence of this era of Sonic. With his posing, the models become so expressive and the scenes always end up looking so cool. Great job, man. Shadow's Radical Train is an abbreviated version of Sonic's, using only a portion of his first section in Mach Speed. His objective is to destroy Eggman's train, rather than save one. And this is where you kinda have to use your imagination a bit. All 3 hedgehogs are meant to be going through Radical Train at the same time, with Silver lagging behind Sonic just a bit.
Anyway, busting Eggman's train is unique enough, beating it down with the same moves you destroy all the other enemies with.
In section 2, you hop on the motorcycle, Shadow's last vehicle type, and the only instance of it in P06. It is required, as Shadow must use its machine gun to destroy the train fully, which has rubber banding so he can't get too close to it on his own. There's another massive missed opportunity here. In the Shadow release, a good player was actually able to avoid destroying Eggman's train in section 1 by jumping around the attack points, but this put the stage on a very strict time limit to get to section 2 before Eggman gets away. While impossible in the current version, it would be awesome to have it to where you could either destroy the train in section 1 like normal, or integrate bypassing it fully and having it start with more health in section 2. Would be a really cool reward for high skill and continuity since you didn't damage the train in section 1. Also worth mentioning that while in Chaos Boost, entering any of Shadow's vehicles gives it infinite ammo like the guns in Shadow's own game. Great detail. Though Silver's chasing Sonic, there's no time limit for his version of the stage. It's just a romp through section 1, which makes it one of the shortest in the game. He's actually able to grind on the rails here, which you couldn't do in the original except for in multiplayer. And that's kinda it. Lore-wise, I like to think that the wooden barriers that replace the doors are an indication that Silver's chasing Sonic, with them being haphazardly put up to stop him. Other than that, even with an over-analytic lens, sometimes the game's just good. Whew, alright, let's chill for a bit and talk about some Easter eggs. Most of them take place in the test stage, which is accessible from the game room. I really like that it's included here, as it's a great place to test out the characters,
especially playing as Amy to cope with their only section being in Dusty Desert.
Section 2 is the most robust, with 2 warp mirrors. The first one brings you to a character select menu from one of the Tokyo Game Show builds of the original game, and after selecting your character, sends you to that Hedgehog's demo version of Kingdom Valley. These are a really short, but neat inclusion. Shadow easily has the coolest one, going through his Section 3 in the same way that Sonic does, instead of in reverse like in his normal stage that we'll get to. The other ones really aren't out of this world though. The other mirror sends Silver to the E3 version of Crisis City. It's incredibly short as well, but it's set at daytime, which is unique for Silver, has Eggman's mechs even though it's set in the future, and retains all the goofy English from the demo. Other Easter eggs include a small treasure hunting segment with Knuckles, and a racetrack for Shadow on his motorcycle, which is actually a Sonic in the Secret Rings test stage. Well, this explains a lot about that game. And that's it. There are a few in stages we haven't gotten to yet, so I'll mention them there. Oh, the second princess stage has finally reared its head. I could just say that Tropical Jungle has all the same strengths as Dusty Desert, while also being held back by the same problems, with a heavier emphasis on automation in Section 1. Onward to Kingdom Valley! Okay, fine, I'll talk about it. Firstly, the stage does look fantastic. I've always enjoyed the jungle setting in Sonic games. And Tropical Jungle gives us 2 sections to play with Sonic and the Princess this time. And it's such a shame that both it and Dusty Desert are some of the best stages in the game, with so many pathways that truly deviate from each other, but we're given a nerfed Sonic to run through them with. I do enjoy this playstyle to a degree like I mentioned in Dusty Desert, but Section 1 here doesn't take near enough advantage of its strengths due to the frequent automation. As for the stage's gimmicks, Tropical Jungle introduces a vine swinging mechanic. In order to make a successful swing, the player has to press the jump button right when the bulb below them is glowing. When you do have control of Sonic, the section's design is solid all the way through. Part 2 is where things really start getting good. Gone is most of the automation, and what we're left with is one of the best designed stages in Sonic. While very short, it's packed with routes that all interweave between each other. The shield's more prevalent here too, as it's required to walk on the water at all when you're on the low routes. There's also several middle routes as well involving homing attacks, grind rails, and even a bit of platforming. Compared to the design of the classic games, well, Sonic 2 and Sonic 3 and Knuckles, the high route's actually the most straightforward and automated, with 2 grind rails and a dash ring, but it's not even the fastest route. Sometimes when playing the level, you'll see a transition between sunny and rainy weather. Changing the weather is definitely underutilized, and I'd love to see it in more levels. It's much tamer than a day-night cycle, but who would want that anyway? In Shadow's story, Rouge is thrown into a section that Sonic doesn't go through, and is given 3 keys to hunt for. As the opening cutscene suggests, the last key is always locked behind a group of enemies at the end, while the other 2 are randomized throughout the stage. Yeah, it's treasure hunting, so if you don't like it in Adventure 1 or 2, you're probably not gonna like it here. But each key only has 3 possible locations, the radar tracks them all at once, and Rouge has such a fluid moveset that you can easily check the entire stage in under a minute. While not exactly the pinnacle of what ChaosX has to offer, it's still a nice shakeup, and more fun than just gliding from start to finish like in the original game. But that's where Silver steps in. He goes through the same section as Rouge, but with no key hunting. Using his uplift object ability, where he can channel some psychokinesis into an object and elevate it and himself higher, he can quickly get to the top route from the very start. Especially with the Lotus, Silver can easily fly over the stage, avoiding everything it has to offer. I feel bad, because this level is dense with gimmicks like riding turtles, using the bulbs to get the turtles to appear, platforming, enemy encounters, in a greater quantity than a lot of the rest of the game, and it all had to be programmed. It's not that you can fly over everything, it's that it's so easy to fly over everything. But that could also be my many hours sunk into this game talking, rather than my first time experience. And that might be the case, because I'm able to take a look at my first time playing the Silver release, and I did none of those things. I just played the level normally. But what does that mean? Are Sonic games actually fine your first time playing through them, and then you just play them so many times you find all the little inconsistencies that make the experience a little bit worse, but also a little bit better because you've gotten so much better at the games and now you're talking about it on the internet? I'm thinking about this too hard. At the very least, the sunrise is beautiful, and the opening cutscene that Sonic Fox assisted on is awesome. Silver's expressions are so clear with the wonder he's experiencing being in the past. This sort of causes a quality discrepancy between the 3 stories, though. It's clear Silver had the most work done on him, with much more fluid animations, whereas in like Shadow's Wet Acropolis cutscene, you can see some movements have like 2 linear keyframes. I'm well aware that it's a lot of work to animate, but I do hope that Sonic and Shadow's cutscenes are brought up to the level of Silver's eventually. Kingdom Valley, the poster child for Sonic 06 as well as P06, is one of the best stages in the franchise. Used for pretty much all of the pre-release footage of the original game, and having been in P06 since Demo 1 in 2019, it shows how much time and effort was put into this stage. It's also Chaos's favorite stage in the game, so that helps.
The detail in the environment here is insane. Really gives off the feeling of an ancient ruined castle. Section 1 of Kingdom Valley is the pinnacle of 3D Sonic design. I've been talking about multiple unique, meaningful pathways as they've come up in the other stages, but this section outclasses them in spades. If every single section of every level were designed like this, we'd be eating so good, and the game would probably take 10 years to come out. There's an opportunity for a shortcut everywhere. Sonic Team really popped off here. The rope mechanic is fairly interesting, if a little slow. Sonic can bounce on them multiple times to gain additional height, but it's almost never worth it and just faster to continue after the initial bounce. Maxing out that first rope, though, is pretty useful because it leads us to our next gem. The white variant unlocks the homing smash, an ability that was originally going to be on the second bracelet Sonic would equip, which was added to his model in P06. Since its ability was ultimately given to the white gem though, I like to think of this power-up as the anti-gravity bracelet, which allows for the slide. Maybe making it a purple color can help signify that. I don't know why I always associated gravity with the color purple. Is it because of Metroid? It's probably because of Metroid. The homing smash works like the homing attack, except it does extra damage at the cost of some action gauge, and you can charge it indefinitely like Shadow's Chaos Spear. Leveling the gem up causes the smash to do more damage, and ricochets the enemy it hits into other targets, making quick work of larger groups. But Sonic can already pretty easily handle large groups with his base moveset, not even counting the green gem. With the slight delay between attacks along with costing energy from the action gauge, the white gem has a very niche use. Remember the jump dash refresh mechanic though? Well, in the Shadow release, the white gem had a quirk where if Sonic were to use the bound attack between uses, he could get extra jump dashes until the action gauge ran out, which allowed for about 3 with a full meter. While the 3 extra dashes was admittedly a bit excessive, this was a super cool mechanic and gave the white gem both combat and platforming use. Being able to still use 1 extra dash for a total of 3 across the board would be a good balance. It can still be advantageous to use because it cancels all of Sonic's speed like Shadow's Chaos Spear, which is very useful with the legacy jump dash type sometimes, but overall it mostly just stays in the inventory in its current state. The brilliance of Section 1 of Kingdom Valley in combination with the massively improved physics of P06 does such an excellent job of giving the player so much freedom to create their own route that it makes me wish the whole stage were designed like this. The rest of the sections aren't bad, they're just a lot more linear. Part 2 opens up with Sonic hopping off an eagle onto a platform, then immediately getting sidelined by Silver for a bit. This is meant to be a tutorial for him, since most folks will play through Sonic's story first, and I think it does a better job than Crisis City, with extra mechanics like the platforms you knock down into the water. At the end, we switch back to Sonic, hop onto the eagle, and make our way into Section 3. It's got the same amount of linearity as Section 2, with some more automation and spectacle set pieces. The main point of player freedom is in the wind rails, which twist and turn around the towers, allowing Sonic to jump off of them early to skip some combat. There's one particular piece of automation too that, while it can be skipped with the help of the gems, goes on for a little too long. In P06, the increased speed of the chain jumps helps alleviate some of it, but it still really drags down the section. The final part leads us to a small bit of combat and platforming. Then, after defeating the final set of enemies,
Oh, that's a lot of enemies. Sonic, leave this up to me. You go after Leaf. Silver, it's all yours.
this cutscene is fantastic, and based off the Sonic Generations 06 mod by Brianu Sonic. But that doesn't mean I want to see the cutscene every time I play the stage. As I said back during the first break where we talked about the options, if I set the cutscenes to be off, I would like the cutscenes to be off. Previous versions of P06 had a spring that would just send you straight to the mock speed section without having to watch the cutscene at all. So if it's too cumbersome to set up a version with the cutscene off, then this is the better option. After our little chat with Silver, thanks for switching sides, buddy, we head into the final section of Kingdom Valley, the last mock speed section. This place is breathtaking, especially with max graphics. One of the best looking parts of P06 for sure, and it has such a great music track to go along with it. The section itself is sort of a mix between Radical Train and Crisis City. It's a linear shot to the end, but there are some twists and turns that Sonic will make, including running on the side of the waterfalls? Not entirely sure what to call them. Anyway, what a fantastic ending. The mock speed section really gives that finale feeling, and while the quality drops after section 1, the stage as a whole is really strong in pacing and feel, making a great end to Sonic's story. Wait, That's not the end? What the hell? Anyway, Shadows Kingdom Valley begins in Section 1, but unlike Sonic, he flies over the entire thing with the hang glider, completely wasting it. Section 2 begins with another key hunt, this time having all 3 keys randomized. They still only have 3 unique spots though, so it's not too bad. Plus the section's quite narrow, so the radar will easily pick up their locations. Once we find the keys, we're greeted with another hovercar section, where like Wave Ocean's hang glider section is technically optional, though it requires some knowledge and skill to pull off. Just like the other one, I think adding a few platforms would be cool to make it a more viable option to skip. However, you can exit this hovercar whenever you want, unlike the hang glider. After saying hello to Chaos Zero and withdrawing from Daddy's bank account,
I can't believe it.
we head into Section 3, which is Sonic Section 3 in reverse. At this point, we've seen this idea multiple times, and I quite like it as a way to mix up the levels between the stories. Especially in PO6, Sonic and Shadow are so similar in their basic platforming abilities that just sending them through the same level design isn't different enough, but doing it this way feels much better. Like Sonic's Kingdom Valley, Silver gets a really cool opening cutscene between him and the blue guy, where the latter really earns his fastest thing alive moniker. Bro's just gone instantly. I know that Chaos had some trouble getting the pendulums to work right in PO6, so that gimmick is used very sparingly here. Changing the opening to use a wind rail is pretty cool though. Section 1 has some pretty standard Silver stuff, with the lighting being adjusted to be a bit more vibrant than the original game. I do like that the towers crumble to the psychic shot. Gives it a lot of use here to create extra platforms because it's such long range. But sadly, Section 2 is pretty lacking. Sonic takes up the beginning portion, doing the exact same thing he does in his stage with the castle automation. After that, Silver does some basic-ass 3D platforming to get to the end part where Sonic heads to Mach speed, but doesn't have a cutscene to coincide with it. It'd be really neat to have the same cutscene from Sonic's Kingdom Valley, but with different angles, or extending the gameplay to spawn the exact same wave that Silver has to defeat while Sonic goes through the door to Mach speed. I'd also love to see Silver go through Sonic's portion, because rather than having the exact same character go through the exact same thing, we're having a different character that plays quite a bit differently from Sonic go through a section that's clearly made for him. Or maybe add a part where Blaze goes through Section 1? She's supposed to be tagging along with Silver, at least according to the OG cutscene that happens after the stage. So having the opening section be with her, or having it somewhere in the middle like as Section 2 would be awesome. Plus, playing the game's best section with one of its best characters? I can't pass that up. Aquatic Base is actually our final full-length stage in Sonic's story, and the best way I can describe it is tacked on. It's just here to have Sonic go through every stage. It's extremely linear, quite literally running down hallway after hallway. There's no alternate paths, which would actually be fine for a final level for me if it were quite difficult. However, this stage is probably as hard as Flame Core, which for Sonic was 4 stages ago. One of the most baffling mechanics are the magnetic pulls. Upon activating one with a damaging move, it'll glow and defeat every enemy in one hit in a fairly large radius around it. I could see this as a score mechanic for the original game as it had no combo system, but these are totally needless in PO6. There's no challenge to activating them, they're just rods sitting right in the open waiting for you to touch them. However, one mechanic that's been balanced quite well in PO6, despite making it easier, are the sphere sections. Sonic has to ride on top of these metallic spheres to avoid lasers or enemy fire, and in Retail 06, one mistake would cause the thing to disappear and he'd fall to his death. In PO6, it now takes 2 hits for the sphere to disappear, becoming smaller upon taking damage. There's a cool interaction with this new mechanic in the level design too. There are a couple item boxes Sonic can grab by jumping off the sphere, but if he were to take a hit, it's no longer big enough to be able to reach them. After this, control switches back over to Tails. The addition of having Tails and or Knuckles running alongside Sonic in these levels is super cool, and it's great that they're both here for the final one. Unfortunately, this is yet another mediocre Tails section. Firstly, it's littered with the magnetic pulls, which make combat a non-issue with a character that already has great combat options. And second, why is the spring here? This part of Aquatic Base has the perfect challenge for Tails. Around the cylindrical room, there are platforms of varying heights, one of which being the way forward at the very top. This could easily be a flight challenge where Tails has to fly from platform to platform, slowly ascending the room until he reaches the top, where the more skilled players can take advantage of his flight mechanics to skip platforms, including the dummy rings to hit distant foes and collect their energy cores to prolong his airtime. So why is there a spring that sends you all the way to the top of the room, avoiding all of these mechanics with a character that can fly? The rest of the section's a little bit better, with spaced out platforms for the Fox to fly between, but the first room is really a kick in the spears. Swapping back to Sonic, we easily defeat hordes of enemies because Eggman
decided to put them a little too close to some old magnets and head into Section 2. The second half of the stage is more of the same linear hallways without much going on. After passing through the loop though, we can see a new mechanic in the form of the wind updraft over the bottomless pit, added in PO6 to give the player a second chance in some of the harder areas of the game. They're also in Kingdom Valley, but I wanted to save their introduction for this particular one because it's saved my bacon more times than I like to admit. A couple hallways and undermined combat sections later and we reach Knuckles. Yep, there are 2 amigo switches in Aquatic Base, and certainly this means we get to talk about the rest of the Echidna's combat abilities, right? Right? Given that you can just glide over everything, I would actually like to see Knuckles have to defeat the enemies here in order to activate the switch. PO6 again keeps continuity by having Sonic actually travel on the ball once Knuckles is done, so maybe another wave could spawn in order to challenge him. Poor Knux, man. Both sections he's in, he just kind of glides over everything. All these super cool moves he gets, like having 3 different ground finishers and the same shockwave drill drive Rouge gets, sort of just go to waste. Tails also didn't fare much better, even in his own stage. I would chalk it up to the stages being designed for their worst versions from the original game. So since much about them aren't changed in PO6, they just feel like nothing now that they're more capable. Ending on a high note for Sonic though, in the following rooms we finally get access to the blue gem, arguably the best one. For the cost of some action gauge, of course, Sonic will do a quick dash forward, the fastest way to move in the game barring some sky gem shenanigans. Leveling it up makes the dash last longer and lowers the cost, with level 3 working like a short boost that blows through enemies. Here's a little bit of sauce for you. The spin kick, while otherwise useless, actually preserves the speed of dash panels and the blue gem if you use it right after activation. So, Sonic can use the blue gem, spin kick twice to refill the meter while maintaining the speed, then use the blue gem again, and the cycle repeats. It's such a fun way to move about the game. It's no surprise it's put at the very end of Sonic's final stage. Shadow's Aquatic Base has some cool visual flair, with a purple hue representing his hunt for Mephiles curtained over the entire stage, and that's all the praise I have for this one. This is my least favorite stage in the game. Shadow just goes through a series of flat combat rooms in Section 1, with the only somewhat interesting platforming part done with silver. And with the tornado kick being the way it is, it's so dull. Maybe the rebalance of the kick will change my mind. Section 2 is a husk of Sonic's. The platforming bit over the chasm is completely removed, and it cuts off early into a final combat section, which can be admittedly cool with something we'll acquire later, but has the exact same problems that all the other combat sections do in this stage. There's so little here, I really hope to see a rework to either extend it or re-add some platforming into Shadow's parts. Silver has the same cool detail as Shadow, with an orange hue instead enveloping the stage to represent Iblis, and his version is probably my favorite of all 3. Don't worry, Shadow gets shafted here too, as his cameo appearance is once again defeating enemies on flat terrain, then he hits a spring and we go back to Silver for the rest of the time. This part has one small interesting thing though. There's a pulley that leads to a rune only Silver can activate, so we'll have to remember that when we come back to this part of the stage as him. We continue with the Weed Head in the exact same location as Shadow's Aquatic Base, varying up the platforming a little bit with some extra runes and navigating the narrow section a bit differently. But now we find ourselves back in the big room where we played as Shadow and can now take the pulley and activate the rune. This opens the door to 3 switches that the Psycho Shock must be used on to activate, which open yet another door in the big room. This is a little awkward. While the Silver Patch added alarms to the front of the door to draw attention, the camera will still pan over to the way to continue the level, and going that way makes it a point of no return. I've seen multiple times where folks will unlock the door and then go the wrong way after. I think a voice line or camera pan or something could help with that, unless it's the intention. Anyway, taking the way that the switches unlock leads Silver to his second upgrade, the Flame of Control. This one makes the objects he throws do more damage and unlocks a new move, the Psychic Knife. Based on his boss fight from Generations, he can charge up his Psychic Shot to instead fire a blade that does a ton of damage and pierces foes. Mashing the button after firing one will fire more, making quick work of foes from a long distance. Just keep an eye on that action gauge. This is also the upgrade I was talking about adding the ability to for him to continue moving after the Psycho Shock. Not only does it make more sense thematically with this particular power, and I think having it attached to the Lotus and Dusty Desert, which is like the 3rd stage in his campaign, would have made him way too powerful too quickly. The sphere riding section is really neat. Since this takes place in the past, all of the lasers are operational unlike Sonic's Aquatic Base, and their intervals are faster. Very nice touch. Section 2 is the other half that Shadow doesn't go through, but Sonic does, except in reverse. Again, it makes it somehow refreshing despite it being the exact same design we went through before. After taking out some enemies and rotting a sphere one more time, hey, there are the magnetic poles, I was wondering when you'd show up. Silver ends his Aquatic Base in the same place as Shadow, which is odd because didn't they say they were gonna split up? Regardless, that's the final stage to talk about in Project 06 in the current build. So what's left to talk about? The 100% experience, of course. Every stage ranks you on how well you played, and getting an S rank on every single one of them is more than worth your time. To get an S rank, one must get a total score of over 50,000 points on the results screen through a combination of going fast, killing a bunch of stuff, and collecting as many rings as possible. I really like the idea that the requirement is 50k across the board, rather than each stage having its own unique S rank. It naturally makes some easier than others, but that's a good thing. That being said though, the bonuses are heavily skewed in favor of the in-level score and ring bonus, so much so that in some stages you can reach the requirement before even touching the goal ring, and it's mostly due to the combo system. PO6 introduces the ability to build up score by chaining a bunch of actions together. The main one is defeating enemies, however, it can also be kept by collecting rings, using dash panels, grinding on rails, or some of the stage-specific gimmicks. The combo will usually end after about 2 seconds of landing on the ground and not doing anything, but there are ways to extend that. Sonic has it the easiest because using his bound attack lengthens the timer considerably, making chains incredibly easy to keep. Shadow can stay in the air and travel super long distances with his 2 jump dashes, Chaos Spear, and Chaos Snap, and Silver has Blaze. He actually can't really take advantage of the combo system like the others can, so his stages rely mostly on the time and ring bonuses. However, it's still horribly skewed. Some of his time bonuses, like the one in Flame Core, are absolutely insane. The main problem with the combo system is that whatever multiplier is given increases way too rapidly. Here's an example of that with me starting at the final checkpoint in Sonic's Aquatic base with 0 points and 0 rings, and using the combo system to rack up 50k points before hitting the goal ring. I think the obvious solution is to lessen the multiplier. While this stinks for score attackers who like seeing really big numbers on screen, getting the S ranks will be a better and more challenging experience overall with the nerfed combo system. Discussing the ring bonus is hard, because I don't think it's very good, even though I like the idea. If I understand what this ranking system's trying to achieve, then ideally, the time bonus, score, and ring bonus should account for around 1/3 of the S rank each. But if you do a near perfect run and get pot-shotted right before the goal ring and lose all your rings, then there goes your S rank. Is that one hit really the difference between the best rank in the game and a B rank? I don't think so. Though it does give incentive to collecting the rings, because outside of 1-ups, they mostly don't do anything. So a long way of saying that while I think the ring bonus is unfair, I think it should still stay in the game, but maybe some adjustments could be made to it. If anything, the time bonus should be the part of the score that's the most volatile, because it can be adjusted per stage, whereas the combo system and ring bonus need to be consistent across the entire game. Since replaying the stage to get a good time is such an important part to the core of Sonic games, I think this bonus is where a little bit of cushion could be given to incentivize finding a more optimal route over running around and defeating enemies and collecting rings. As outside of the extreme cases, that's the most skill-based part of the total score. While I prefer the method of rebalancing the bonuses so they're all vital to getting the S rank, another solution could be to readjust them where any of the 3 could do it on their own. This could be a fun way to incentivize replaying the game with multiple ways to get the best rank rather than just a single optimal route. But I'd say that's enough talk about just getting the S ranks. What happens when you collect them all? Well, earning one gets you a gold medal for that stage, and getting all of the gold medals in a character's story unlocks a new power-up for its main hedgehog, and they're all worth grabbing. Sonic can pick up the Rainbow Gem. When equipped, he can transform into Super Sonic as long as he has 50 rings. The yellow guy can now insta-kill any enemy and is invincible himself. And since he transformed via a gem, that means Super Sonic can be leveled up. Level 2 grants him greater ground speed and jump height, and level 3 will unlock the Arrow of Light ability. For the cost of the entire action gauge, Not Super Saiyan here can do a massive dash forward on the ground or in the air that, of course, will destroy anything in its path, and can even be used in Mach speed sections if you enter them in the super form. You only get one shot, but he keeps his invincibility and has increased speed compared to regular Sonic. He's also got an interesting drawback in that he can't use the regular gems while super, considering that the Rainbow Gem has to be equipped to maintain the state. And thusly, he's intended to be a mixture of all their powers, but a master of none of them. Shadow gets the Memory Shard Light, which, at level 3 Chaos Boost and a maxed out Maturity Meter, allows him to release his limiter rings and enter uninhibited mode. This is Pseudo Super Shadow. He's invincible and can one-hit foes like Supersonic, and also has his Chaos Boost ability supercharged. Chaos Snap benefits from the one-tap, of course. Lance now doesn't need to charge, and Shadow can fire up to 5 of them at once, and Chaos Blast, along with the Lance, now don't use any extra meter to perform. There's an interesting drawback to this one too, though. The Action Gauge. It drains incredibly fast while Shadow's in this state, but can be refilled with energy cores just like Chaos Boost. If he were to run out of gauge, he enters a 6-second stun to recover. This happens regardless of his predicament, except in automation and on rails. That would be disastrous. This one's the most straightforward. Shadow becomes even stronger than he was already. However, it has one of the same problems that regular Chaos Boost has. It kind of just takes too long to get here, and Shadow's so strong in his base form that it's kind of a waste of time. Sure, it's still neat to have, but I would love Chaos Boost to have more of an impact on Shadow's gameplay. Of course, the biggest culprit's the Tornado Kick, but even with that being nerfed, I think the Memory Shard could also double the speed in which Shadow gains energy, allowing us to use Chaos Boost more frequently. One thing that's going to be really helpful for Chaos Boost that I know is coming in the next release is that Shadow will be able to activate level 1 on the move rather than being forced to stand still and use an animation. That's going to be so sick to do. Thanks so much for adding it, Chaos. Silver gets the Sigil of Awakening through condensing the power of the God Puff, which grants him use of ESP mode. This one's governed by the Maturity Meter. And as an aside, it's super cool that each of the 3 super states focus on one of the 3 resources of the game. Supersonic uses rings, Uninhibited Shadow uses the Action Gauge, and ESP Silver uses the Maturity Meter. Energy cores now, as expected, fill up the Maturity Meter as well as the Action Gauge. Once at least 3 are absorbed, the meter will meet the white dash, and now Silver can activate his super state. Oh, where to begin? First off, the Maturity Meter will drain while in this form, but its duration cannot be extended like Supersonic or Uninhibited mode. So you as the player have to choose whether you want to benefit from its enhancements for a short time, or wait until the Maturity Meter is filled up more before you activate it to have it for longer. Extremely interesting decision making and unlike anything I've seen in Sonic. As for those enhancements, Silver emits an ESP blast on activation, similar to Chaos Blast. He now also automatically stuns enemies close to him, and the Psycho Smash can one-shot them if they're stunned. Silver can now move around with an ability called the Grab All, which is activated by double tapping the Psychokinesis button. This picks up objects in a full 360 degrees around him rather than just what's in front of him normally. The Psychic Shot now stuns in an area? I'm kind of unsure about this one. The effect when it hits an enemy is different, but I don't see any difference gameplay-wise. All projectiles are also auto-reflected with a sweet-looking effect. Really dig the futuristic design this form's going for. And, the last and most important piece, the Action Gauge now drains 35% slower. This, of course, allows for things like insane teleport dashes when combined with the Lotus, or a bajillion, so somewhere around that number, knives with the flame. This is easily the best one. The other 2 are cool, but Silver feels like an unstoppable force against a game with no immovable objects. Also, to debunk a common misconception, the S-rank upgrades can be collected independent of the other ones, so Sonic could only have the Rainbow Gem collected, for example. Anyway, since we already completed the game though, where do we get to use these cool powers? Well, playing in New Game Plus, of course. Project 06, overall, is a joy on the first playthrough, but like with many other Sonic games, the New Game Plus / Time Attack / speedrunning experience is where the game glistens brighter than a fully polished Sinnoh gym badge. Ah, my hands! Of course I wanted to talk about the speedrunning experience a little bit because it kicks ass. But even just messing around in the stages with all the main Hog's abilities collected is mega fun. Whether it's finding crazy skips in Sonic's story with different gem combos in Silver's ESP mode, or blasting through enemy wave after enemy wave with Shadow's Uninhibited mode when you eventually get to it, it's almost indescribable how fun it is to use these characters' full arsenals. There's a reason the any % categories are New Game Plus. For me, I don't actually find much pleasure in speedrunning games. I have much more fun just playing them casually. But Project 06 is something different. I don't find doing big game-breaking skips that fun. It's really cool to see him in action once or twice, like in a GDQ showcase or something, but many times in many games, they require tough as hell setups or just don't feel like you're playing the game anymore. As far as I and the speedrunning community know at this moment, Project 06 is completely devoid of this. The speedrun is just playing the game extremely well while still playing the game. Our any % category is like another game's no major glitches or no out of bounds by default. So if you find fun in time attacking playing or speedrunning these stages, please join the speedrunning Discord linked in the description. I'd love to see more people take a stab at it, for however far they want to push their times. Before I go, I want to end this video discussing a few random things about PO6 that I didn't think fit anywhere else. For Shadow, I think it'd be cool if his Chaos Boost abilities were split off into their retail upgrades, the Memory Shard Red, Blue, and Black, and hidden around the stages. There's just not much to find in them right now, and kinda makes completing his story a little boring. I know the silver medals will be added in the next release, but having a tangible power to find and use right away would be sick. Like my proposal for a Blaze Easter egg to finish Silver's Flame Core as her, I would love for the lesser seen amigos to get similar treatment. Like for example, putting a hole in the ceiling for Amy and Dusty Desert to go through and finish the stage as her. You could use the spinning hammer attack to hit the ball, and the secret switches for the Lotus could be changed to runes, so you'd have to be Silver to activate them. Kinda like how the flame is hidden. Maybe being able to finish Aquatic base as Knuckles since there's some required combat. Little things like that. In addition, utilizing more of the unused parts of stages for alternate routes would be awesome as well. Like having a secret spring in Sonic's Crisis City where he'd go to Shadow section instead. I remember watching videos like Darkspine Sonic's back in the day where he was able to get to Shadow Spot in Wave Ocean as Blaze and thinking it was so cool. There is going to be a massive amount of content in the last release, but hey, why not go all the way? And that's it. I've wanted to make a video like this on Project 06 for a long time. I've had so many thoughts and feelings over my thousands of hours playing the game, and I wish for it to be the best it can be. And I'm so grateful for what it's already done and what it will do. Ultimately, I wish for it to be the best it can be and bring as much success as possible to the team behind it. Thank you guys so much for your hard work on making this game and the friends I've made because of it. Thanks to Chaos as well for the kick-ass thumbnail for this video, and to the Stelmo crew for continued support as I promise to keep improving the content. And thanks to you so much for watching this behemoth of a video. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.